folks, and welcome to something a little bit different where we are trying to find out what is the best track conditions. So, in a nutshell, me and my partners in crime, Steve and Booty, we had five hosted sessions. Four of them were exactly the same weather, and the fifth one is kind of a sea of what if happens. Right, so the four that were all the same, we set the track temperature or the air temperature, because that's the only thing we can set in hosted races, to as hot as it will go, and it was as cold as it will go. And we also set the track conditions to 0% and 100%. We logged 15 laps each, and I've taken the three fastest of those 15 laps, because obviously we had some spins in there, because we were messing around, and basically trying to work out what is the best track conditions and how does it affect. The reason this has come about, because on all of my track guides, I've always tried to tell you what the track conditions were and what the temperatures were. Now that is because it does affect lap time, but how does it affect lap time? So that's what I'm trying to see here. So, science time. Before we get to that, I want to show you the sessions themselves. So you can see there, the hottest temperature for the air we could set is 90 and the minimum is 65. Partly cloudy was the sky on all four of them. I'll explain the fifth one in a moment. But you can see they're just going through the settings. They were absolutely identical, same time and everything to try and make things as accurate as we can. The only thing we changed was 0 to 100% on the track state or track conditions. The fifth one, as mentioned, is overcast and minimal temperature and 0% track usage. Reason we did this, we wanted to see how cold we could get the track, because even though it's a cold air temperature, technically it's still a warm track because the sun's beating on it, if that makes sense. It's not as hot as a hot day, but it was not as cold as what I was expecting. So the first graph you can see here, basically let's explain how these are going to be formatted. So the top two here are the weather conditions. So there's 4 partly cloudy, 1 overcast. And then the next column down shows you cold and 0% usage, or cold 100%, hot 0, blah, blah, blah. Tells you the track conditions. Air temp and track temp are below that. But in a nutshell, this graph here gives you the average lap time. So these are the 3 fastest, and then we've got an average for each. Obviously the drivers on the left-hand side, AB, SC and TD correspond to Andy, Steve and myself, and you can see in each session we've got an average lap time for every single one. The interesting bit to start off with is down at the bottom, lap times versus cold and 0% usage. So what this is the cold and 0% usage, so the column on the left hand side, is the base lap, and that is the percentage of lap time that we are slower in each of the different sessions. Obviously this is why I wanted to do the overcast cold, because that is the coldest the track could get, and you can see how that affects the lap time. We are, Andy's 1% quicker, Steve's 0.9 and I'm 0.73 quicker. So this really shows you a heavy dependence on track temperature with lap time. Also, the interesting thing is not much difference between the cold and 100% usage. A bit more for Andy and a lot less for me and Steve, which is quite interesting. Another way to visualize this a little bit easier is with a lovely line graph, and here you can see lap time on the left hand side, and then across the bottom we've got the 4 track states that we used. Cold 0, cold 100, hot 0, hot 100. And you can see there all 3 drivers, minus Steve on the end there at the hot 100% usage, are following a trend. With the track being 100% usage on a cold track seems to be slightly slower, and then lap times increase dramatically as the track temperature increases, and then it increases a little bit minus me and Steve for the hot 100% usage. Mine does increase by literally 1,000th of a second, so that was interesting that there's more variation between a 0% and 100% track usage in a cold weather situation rather than a hot weather situation. So just for clarity, I put the cold and 0% usage on there from the overcast results, and you can see the lap times are much quicker when the track is a lot colder, even quicker than our standard cold 0% usage. So yeah, I'm not going to focus on that lap time too much, because obviously it's a different weathercast, but it is interesting to see. So this is the real meaty section of the video, and this is what I want to try and pin down and work out what on earth is happening. So the top half of the graph is exactly what you saw on the other graphs. It's just a base so you know what track temp was everything and our average lap times for the sessions. the bit at the bottom, cold versus hot, and 0% versus 0% versus 100% is what we're looking for. So let's start off with the cold versus hot, 0% and 100%. So the 0% column is basically a cold 0% track usage versus a hot 0% track usage, and obviously the 100 is the same. 100% on a cold track and 100% on a hot track. And you can already see there, that's our percentage of lap time increase. So we are both slower, cold versus hot. And also there's an average number at the very bottom that I'll point to as well on the average of all three drivers. And that's the kind of the average that I'm looking at the moment. So you can see there, between hot versus cold, we're 3% slower on a 0% track usage. And we're only 2% slower on 100% usage. So this is telling me there's a huge difference between track temperature, but it's the difference between 0% track usage and 100% track usage is lessened the more hot the track is, which is a little bit new and a little bit weird for me to work out. Tire wear was definitely reduced on a higher usage of track, and that's to go with if there's more rubber on the tarmac, then you're going to lose less rubber on your tires effectively. So the next section of this little bit down at the bottom of the graph is 0 versus 100%. So we're keeping the cold conditions and we're doing lap time between, cold versus hot, let's say. So you can see there, Andy and Steve are a little bit slower with a cold track. That the only difference is 0 and 100% track usage. I'm a little bit quicker. These are all tiny percentages now, and I'm really interested by this because technically I thought track conditions made a big difference, but clearly it's just down to really tyre wear. I'm calling the average on that of 0.29% as probably a bit of driver error in there. Like I say, there is variations between our lap times. We're not robots. I wanted to do it between 3 different drivers because there's 3 different driving styles here, and the more I average it out, the more it really gets rid of the driver error. So really, I'm telling that as there's not much difference. As long as you're on a cold track, there's not much difference between a 0% usage and 100% usage. The other thing that's going against us as well is this is a very small track. Lime Rock is, a 50-second lap time, put it that way. On a longer track, it might be more interesting to look at. Let's pick a Le Mans. It might be a bigger factor, but on this scenario case here that we did, not that much different. If you look at the hot, it completely goes the other way. So with the cold track temperature, more rubber, we seem to be slower, but with the hot track temperature, more rubber, we seem to be faster. Now, no idea how that works. Obviously, we can speculate that the tire on the tarmac, or the rubber on the tarmac, is a little bit more sticky, and therefore it's gripping to the rubber on my tire more. But that's really interesting to see that there is basically a 0.7 variance between lap time between the hot and cold versus the amount of rubber on track. And that to me says what we did in the first instance, where the hot weather was a little bit nicer with more rubber compared to less rubber than the cold was. And that to me was a little bit interesting. So yeah, pause the video if you want, have a divulge of that information on screen. Very, very interesting. You see there, I did put the overcast one in there, and this is based on the first column because that is exactly the same. So the only difference between the first column and the overcast column is literally the fact that it's overcast and the track temperature is very, very cold. You see on the cold and 0% usage, we've got a track temp of 36 degrees, 97 Fahrenheit, whereas on the overcast, it's 67 Fahrenheit, 19 degrees. So it is a lot colder. And because of that, on average, we're a 1% quicker, which is absolutely insane. One thing we did notice driving around is all 4 of them seem to be very, very different in what we were feeling the car was doing. We obviously ran the same setup, we ran it at the same time of day to try and keep it as accurate as we can, but we found that some were really slidey, and some were really greasy, and some were really horrible, and ones that we thought, well, but the biggest thing we noticed was speed, particularly at this point on the track you can see in the ghost behind, is we were getting into 5th gear before the second to last corner on a colder track, and we were changing to 6th earlier at this last corner on a cooler track than we were on a hotter track. So that got us thinking about, were we actually having more engine power, and that was accelerating us quicker. Now you could put that down to getting more grip into the corner, so therefore you're exiting the corner faster, 100%. But that was one thing we massively noticed, particularly at Lime Rock Park. In the last 2 corners, we were always a gear higher, which I thought was very, very interesting to observe. Yeah, so there we are, done and dusted. All very interesting, and a few things that I didn't know that I sort of presumed, but I presumed wrong. So yeah, it was very interesting to see the track usage between the different temperatures as well. And doing these sessions back to back, you did notice the power difference from the engine, which I thought was quite interesting. Particularly at this part of the track on Lime Rock, you did notice with the gears and particularly the entry speed that you were taking. But yeah, big thank you to my partners in crime, Steve and Booty, for helping me do this. I do appreciate it. And as you can imagine, it was quite interesting putting all the numbers together and seeing a result. If you did like this video and you did find it useful, please do smash that like button, and if you do want to subscribe, by all means you can do. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what everyone else thinks of this, and yeah, going forward, see what happens. Catch you on the next one.